Hi, I'm Blake from baaelectronics, and in the last video I showed how to repair the EW300G2 series microphone from Sennheiser. This video will be the sequel to that. I will be repairing the EW500G2 series Bodypack transmitter. Now this one currently doesn't work. I already see two problems with it. One is that the battery compartment has some corrosion on it, probably from some batteries that have exploded in the past. And also the antenna is missing some of its insulation, and there's no clip on the back. So I'm going to do a complete disassembly of this unit, see everything that could go wrong with it, and everything that has gone wrong with this one, hopefully repair it, and get it back to fully working order. So the first thing you want to do when starting repair is make sure you have all the correct tools. I have my T6H Torx driver here. I have a pick, and I have some tweezers. This should be everything you need to get into this unit and be able to fix it. So the first thing is turn it over, and there are 4 screws on the back. You'll need your T6 to remove. All right, once all the screws are out, then the back will just peel back like that, and you can see the innards of the unit. So this first board here is the board that handles the radio and the wireless. So first thing I'm going to do is take the tweezers and just pull out this ribbon cable. This connects the wireless board to the board below it. Take that out very carefully and use that same T6 screwdriver to get these 3 screws out. So these actually are not the same screws as the screws on the outside. They have a slightly finer thread. So keep these separate from the ones that are on the outside of the body. So just lift up on this board and it'll come out, and you have your wireless board right there. So it looks like this particular board was manufactured on the 32nd week of 2007. So this means this is actually older than most of the microphones that are in our inventory currently. Most of those were manufactured in 2008, because I have done this process with a few of our other microphones, and they've been from 2008. So this one's one of the older ones, which is probably why it's broken, because it's had a lot of use over the years. So setting that aside, we have this other board at the bottom here, and this actually connects to the battery compartment and contains all the buttons on the outside. So all you really have to do to get this board out is to make sure this front part's open first, or else you'll snag it on the board. And then it'll just lift out of the front panel of the mic. You might lose some buttons because they're very loosely held in place. So this front part is now completely free. You should be able to replace the buttons and whatever you need to on this front part now. These seem like somewhat of a common failure part. These are the little buttons that go in the front panel. So when these wear out, they'll fall inside the mic, and you'll have to replace it or put it back in, just like the handheld series that I did that video on a while ago. The button will fall out of the insert, and you won't be able to turn it on anymore. And now you can go on to this top part. So this top part contains the mute switch and the jack for plugging in a microphone. What you would do to have to replace this is you'd need a small little wrench that can get this ring off. Since this jack seems to be in good condition, I'm going to leave that alone for now. But if your jack is actually broken, then you might want to consider taking this metal plate off by unscrewing here and just lifting it off, and actually resoldering the connections going to the jack, and then you can replace it with a new one. All these parts can be found on the Sennheiser Pro Spares website. If you want to go find them, order them, and then replace them yourself, I think this is its own part that you can purchase on its own. Now on this particular mic, there is some corrosion on the battery compartment. So what I'm going to grab is my sacrificial toothbrush from the dentist I used to go to, and also a bottle of isopropyl alcohol. And vinegar would probably be better for this, but I don't have any. I only have isopropyl alcohol. So I'm going to spritz some on the toothbrush real quick and just scrub at those battery contacts. You can clean the front later. So right now we're focusing on the back. You want to make sure that there's no corrosion on any parts of the battery terminals or really any other part of the board. So once that's clean, we can start putting it back together. So one of the buttons fell in there. So to put this back together, you're going to want to stick the buttons back in the front panel. The up and down buttons are actually curved a certain way, so they only go in one way. Once those are in, you'll carefully slide this down underneath the board. Make sure not to tilt it back or the buttons will fall out of the front panel. So the board slides into the front panel like that. The front will click on, and your front panel is back together. Don't open this when you have this board loose, because that's what makes the front board actually able to come out of the entire front panel. So on this particular one, the antenna has lost some of its insulation. Now the proper way to remedy this would actually be to buy a new antenna, because it's an antenna, there's only one solder point in the entire thing to remove this. You have to unsolder this right here. Take the antenna out, get a new one, stick it on. I believe only the G3 antennas are available at the moment. The G2 antennas, they kind of figured out that they were failing in this way. So you will be able to buy a G3 antenna that fits the range of your mic. This particular one is the 518 to 554 range. So I would get an antenna that's close enough to that range to be able to work properly. On this one, because I don't have any antennas to replace it with, I'm going to use some heat shrink to just put over this part that the insulation is not there. Okay, so I think the 3.2 will fit the best because it has to go over this strain relief and also over the part on the antenna that's frayed. Alright, so now you want to measure how much heat shrink you actually need. Place it about that far down. And I'm just going to grab it where I need to cut it. I'm going to cut off about this much so there's not a ton of extra heat shrink on the antenna. Heat shrink shouldn't impact the performance at all. It just makes it look a little nicer and make sure that the antenna does not get damaged again. So this is usually from somebody putting it in their pocket upside down or something like that, where it can cause the antenna insulation to just fall right off because it's so old. Now I can heat it up to shrink it down. It's probably not the proper way to do it. Ideally, you'd get a heat gun, something, but my heat gun has not worked for about 4 or 5 years, so I'm not going to bother with that. And melt that heat shrink right on there, and can also try and hold it straight if your fingers can manage it. After the heat shrink dries, you should have a somewhat repaired antenna. Close up my box of heat shrink, bring over the mic, open it back up, and place this board right back in to the mic. Technically, you do not need to replace this board if all you're fixing is the antenna. I wanted to take this apart to both make this instructional video and to check kind of the rest of the stuff. Because as we saw with the G2 handheld, you can't really just see what's going on with it just by taking off that little end piece. You kind of have to look further in between the boards to make sure there's not a blown capacitor or a burned up trace or burned IC, because that definitely happened with one of the G2s that I fixed, is that the inductor had simply popped off of the board, which is fantastic. It's kind of nice if you have multiple mics, you're able to swap the best parts from each one. It's a pretty difficult process to do is to get the little ribbon cable inside the connector. So you just kind of make sure that it's in the connector, and then you can wiggle it back and forth to make sure that it's actually seated in the middle of the connector. So it looks like it's fairly pushed in, so go ahead and push it in as much as I can while still keeping the arm open. So that's all the way in. Take the tweezers and squeeze that little arm closed so that the ribbon cable is held in nice and tight like that. Close this back up and check out the battery compartment, because that was one of the parts that was corroded slightly. Once again, I'm going to take my Henry Delclose toothbrush, sprayed a bit of alcohol on it. Now, vinegar would be better because battery acid is not really acid, it's a base. So if you want to really clean up a nasty battery spill, just get some nice vinegar or some weak acid and scrub it on top of those contacts, and it'll clean up the contacts real nice and be able to make contact with your batteries again. I have had batteries explode in other mics, and it just wreaks havoc on the conductivity of the various parts in the compartments. So you can try and get out some of the other junk that the batteries left behind. This technique actually works very well for getting the crud out of very small areas, the mute switch, the jack, and everything. So now that that's all cleaned up, I'm going to pop these screws back in. Screw each screw in. It's really just good practice to screw in, corner screws like this, where you have the first two in the corners so that you don't put stress on one part of the mic and the other. Of course, this one opens by this hinge on the bottom, so this isn't entirely necessary, but it's good practice, especially with CPU coolers, because you don't want one side to have more pressure on the other side, or it'll crack open, and that's not great for a CPU. So now that this is back together, the one part I actually did get for this, as opposed to just fixing what was on the thing already, was a nice clamp that goes on the back. Now these, I believe, are also on Pro Spares. This one I got off of another G2 that was in worse shape than this one. I decided to try and fix this one because I felt overall it was in better condition. It's this back part, once so many people wear it, you can't even read the lettering. So this one is obviously broken a very long time ago, and no one has ever bothered to do anything about it. So this is one of the best condition G2s that I've seen still remaining. Stretch the clip over the back and into the slots on the back, and that should be it. Obviously, this isn't the best repair job you could have done, but it definitely protects it from either making contact or being exposed or whatever. It's better than nothing. Pop some good batteries in here. I actually don't know if these are good. We'll see. Try again. Well, obviously not the freshest batteries I have, but it is certainly working. I have this little cheap lavalier mic that I can stick into the 3.5 millimeter jack there. Turn it back on, and so we got AF. I set the sensitivity a little lower. Sensitivity, how about minus 30? Yep. So I'm going to exit. I hope this frequency is clear. 518, 150. We'll see if any church nearby is getting hammered with some RF. But it certainly looks like it is working. So that is the EW500 G2 series Bodypack transmitter. Hopefully everything you need to know about how to fix your own. I don't think this is going to be WM2 anymore. It's going to be more like EW15 or EW16 for Gym 1.